If you like smash mouth football, I think that's what Missouri's offense should get back to in 2025.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And while the Tigers fell just a tiny bit short of their stated goal of making the playoff this past season, should that be the goal once again in 2025? I want to get into that, but first I want to remind you, well, as if you really need a reminder, that Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $250 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And for those of you who are everyday listeners of this program, you know I'm high on Beau Pribula, the Penn State quarterback transfer, expected to be the starter at quarterback next season, this coming fall for Missouri. Though, of course, Sam Horn, Drew Pine, and the other members of this Missouri roster will certainly have something to say about that. But if you follow my takes closely, you know that one thing I like about Pribula is not only do I think he's a high upside player, I also think he's a high floor player too, meaning if the passing game doesn't completely come into place, well, I think at the very least Pribula's running game is strong enough that he can be a part of a run-heavy offense. And really, the more I think about this 2025 season, the good news for Missouri is it's not just 1 year with Pribula. The Tigers have him in 2026 as well. I think maybe the biggest thing I would be concerned about for Pribula, I think all of the physical tools are there, but obviously it would be a lack of experience. I think the more I study quarterbacks over the years and decades of watching football, this isn't exactly a new idea here, but obviously experience matters. It matters at every position and every position in life, quite honestly, but especially at the quarterback position. The more experience you have in college is a decent predictor of how you're going to do in the NFL. At the very least, a lot of the busts at the position have lacked a lot of those reps. So Pribula, what I would expect then, obviously, is you'd think he's going to be, you'll see the best of Beau Pribula in 2026. So at the very least, I think in 2025, especially earlier in the season, I think Missouri should run the football early and often. I think this should be a run-heavy, smash-mouth football type of team. Sort of the best version of Missouri at the end of 2023 was, well, just mashing guys in the face with Cody Schrader and Armand Membu and Javon Foster and that really good Missouri offensive line from 2023. Kirby Smart of Georgia, their head coach, he said it best, just talking about how physical Missouri was in that game, that even though it ended up as obviously a Missouri loss. But I'm just telling you, too, with the Missouri running backs as well, the talent in that room, even without Keywan Lacey. Obviously, I wish he was still here, but you got to love the Ahmad Hardy transfer, in my opinion. Plus, on top of that, I think there's some interesting young players on the roster, too. Probably most notably, the freshman Marquise Davis, I think definitely in line to compete for time at the running back position too. So hopefully Ahmad Hardy looks like the type of guy who can take a large share of the carries, but I think as much as Missouri's going to run it potentially next season, you might want to see multiple backs once again. But the thing with Beau Pribula too, one thing Eli Drinkwitz sort of hinted at before even getting into any of the transfer portal this offseason is that it's easier for a coaching staff to put together a run-heavy offense than it is a passing offense. You need a lot more continuity that just, again, takes time, takes repetition at between quarterback and receiver, that type of deal. Well, I would even take it a step further. I think at the offensive line, I think that truth holds at the offensive line position as well, because quite simply, it's just easier when you've got a whole bunch of new guys, including 2 new tackles that are likely going to be broken in for Missouri this fall. It takes a lot of continuity at that position, too, especially in pass blocking. I think run blocking, even though I'd say Missouri's outside zone-heavy scheme requires a little more continuity than just straight-up man blocking. But, that's sort of the trend these days in all of football, especially in college football, is zone blocking. So regardless, I just think at every level, whether it's the quarterback, the receivers, the offensive coordinators actually trying to install an efficient passing offense, or just the offensive line themselves, which Missouri seems to be rotating a lot of new guys in with each year in the portal, it is a little bit easier to go with a run-heavy unit than it is a pass-heavy one, I would say. So I think that's something maybe you'll see a little bit more from in Missouri, especially early in the season in 2025, and hopefully by 2026, a more experienced Beau Pribula will be ready to air it out even more. But of course, when it comes to Beau Pribula's inexperience, everything is relative, because of course Pribula does have some experience. In fact, a lot of my positive thoughts about Pribula are based on his comeback victory with Penn State. He was the number 1 for the Nittany Lions in the entire second half. Drew Aller got hurt. A nice comeback victory for Penn State, where Pribula was a big part of it for sure, especially after getting warmed up. I'd say the first 2 drives didn't go great. Then the next 2, pretty darn good. Some good touchdown drives from Penn State. So it's not as though he has no experience, but at the same time, just one half of football, and some spot duty here. The Penn State definitely used Pribula as a runner in some packages, to be sure. But again, that's just not a ton of experience, as it's zero experience as a week-to-week starter. And recently I talked about Arch Manning, who is obviously expected to be Texas's starter next season. Well, I had some pushback from a listener who said, hey, how can you say that Arch Manning is an unknown? Again, it's not that as though we've never seen Arch Manning play football. Again, everything is relative. Arch is a relative unknown because he's never started an entire season for the Longhorns. And if you think that starts against ULM and Mississippi State, for example, which is who Arch started against this past season, if you think that's enough to know exactly how he's going to perform against college football playoff caliber opponents, then okay, maybe you watch those 2 games a heck of a lot more closely than I did. I personally just need to see a little bit more. Now, don't get me wrong, I think Arch seems like a special talent, and I'm not betting against that pedigree whatsoever. My main point here is that even Arch Manning, he's still a relative unknown, just like Beau Pribula is, though a lot of people are assuming more. And to be fair, there is another important difference here. Pribula is going to be with a new offensive coordinator, a new coaching staff, and an entirely new program this coming season with Missouri, whereas Arch has now been around with Steve Sarkisian and Texas for a while. So he's been preparing for this moment now for multiple off seasons, and of course this entire season as well. So there's no doubt that if people are more bullish on Arch Manning than Beau Pribula, I 100% get it. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of context here on these two situations to sort of give you an idea of why of my thinking about Beau Pribula moving forward. So with that said, what about 2025? Is the college football playoff a reasonable goal for Missouri? Once again, let's talk about it, but first, the Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. And of course, the live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is quite easy to navigate as well. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. So download the app and head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Off the top of my head, I can't remember a specific moment or quote from Eli Drinkwitz or Brady Cook, Luther Burden, or anybody associated with the team last season when the Tigers said, yes, the college football playoff, making it is our goal. Maybe they did, and I just forget it. But regardless, if it wasn't explicitly said, that was the worst kept secret in all of Columbia, Missouri. And I thought that was a very reasonable expectation for, maybe not expectation, but certainly a goal. And I'll just say for 2025, I don't know that I can say, again, with Missouri having a new quarterback, Luther Burden gone, Armand Mimbu, a couple of first-round draft picks there that I just listed. It's looking like here more and more as these mock drafts are coming out here nationally. I can't say that it's my personal goal as a fan. Certainly not an expectation as though like the season is a failure in 2025 if Missouri doesn't make the college football playoff. I'm certainly not going to go that far. But I will say this, when it comes to the administration, the athletic department, obviously the coaches, the locker room, if they think the playoff is the goal, if that's just the new world order at the University of Missouri, especially with the Tigers spending a bunch of money in the transfer portal, seemingly rather successfully with each and every offseason cycle now, if this is indeed the new world order for Missouri, well, I applaud them for that. I think that's an excellent way to do business. I'm just saying as a fan, if they don't make the playoff, I'm not going to cry in my beer and say we're a complete failure and, well, we got to rethink this program or anything like that. But honestly, just the way Missouri has gone about its business after, well, really pushing all of its chips in the table as much as you could reasonably expect in 2024. The Tigers were very aggressive in 2025 once again. I don't really know how much more you can ask than that. So once again, I applaud the whole football program for their approach. And speaking of Super Bowl 59, if you're not a fan of the Kansas City Chiefs, which I'm sure many of you in the audience are, as I am a fan of the Chiefs as well, if you're not, I totally understand if you're getting a little bit tired of watching the Chiefs win. But at the same time, I would point out that, hey, once again, casual NFL viewer, the Chiefs and the Bills, was that not entertaining? Once again, the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes, the whole crew has given you another exciting football game. So I would say you're welcome to that. And to that point, it turns out Missouri is pretty doggone good at that as well the past couple seasons. Not only have the Tigers won a whole bunch of games, double-digit victories, in fact, each of the last two seasons. According to Bill Conley over at ESPN, he did the top 100 games just in terms of entertainment factor for 2024. The Tigers had not one, but two, but three, but yes, four of the top 100 most exciting games of 2024. In reverse order, we'll check in at number 96, the Music City Bowl against Iowa. Then you had Oklahoma at 86. Then all the way down 44th, homecoming against Auburn. And yes, even better than that, unfortunately. The one loss, I was there, Williams-Brice Stadium against South Carolina. So really, if there were 33 games that were better than that Missouri-South Carolina game this past season, that is pretty doggone impressive. By the way, South Carolina, speaking of the Gamecocks, well, they were kind of the cardiac cocks as well, with 5 of those top 100 games, including the Missouri ball game, although just 2 wins. I think that's one reason why a lot of people are bullish on the Gamecocks for this following season, making the college football playoff. They seem to get better as the season went along. The young quarterback, Lenora Sellers, considered by some to be the best in the league, at least second behind Garrett Nussmeier, that type of deal. But again, I do have to come back to cardiac cocks. Come on, that's pretty good. Give me that. And in my ongoing crusade against instant replay, especially against basketball, well, listener and viewer Judson agrees with me on the topic and continues by saying, I started watching some Division II and Division III football this year, and one thing that I absolutely love is that in the vast majority of the games, there is no replay. And you know what? People just accept it. Maybe 1 or 2 calls are missed in the game. No one cares. The players move on, the game flows, and we don't have to spend 15 minutes micro-analyzing whether the ball skimmed a blade of grass or whether it was a catch. I say do away with review in all sports. A bad call here or there is part of the game. And indeed, it remains part of the game, Judson. I agree with you, even in the era of instant replay. And that's the thing. What really stood out there is that Judson said, and I'll take his word for it as somebody who hasn't watched a ton of D2 or D3 football in my life, but that for the most part, the players and the coaches move on with their lives. I almost think that instant replay has increased the amount of complaining, if anything. It certainly hasn't decreased the amount of conspiracy theories that happen online, particularly, again, hey, speaking of Super Bowl 59, all anybody wants to talk about on my For You tab on my X app is the Kansas City Chiefs cheating or the NFL being involved in some sort of elaborate conspiracy theory to rig the game for the Chiefs, that type of deal. So even with instant replay, this talk seems to me to be at the absolute fever pitch I've ever seen in my entire life. And again, I don't want to be totally unreasonable here. Judson says get away with review in all sports. I wouldn't get rid of it in tennis. For those of you who've seen how tennis replay works, well, speaking of something that seems to work and we just move on with our lives, I really haven't seen any argument over any tennis instant replay, whether the ball hit the line or not, that type of deal. It seems to work, and most importantly, it moves quickly. The tennis match is interrupted for, 2 or 3 seconds, and the crowd gets to go, oh, and we get to see if the ball actually hit the line or not. If we could find a way to efficiently and make calls correctly. Again, it's not just about being correct. You got to be efficient too, because again, this is about entertainment and actually improving the television product, not making it worse. Because so far, that's all that instant replay has done to me, especially in the sport of basketball. And speaking of things that I absolutely hate, well, whoever conceived and approved this new SEC men's basketball tournament format, well, that person should be drawn and quartered, quite honestly. So before I get to that spectacular visual here in the program, I do have to tell you this is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Well, now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, investment, and everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed, no waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service, real-time updates, only an iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Now, like a lot of you, initially I wasn't a huge fan of Oklahoma and Texas when that news broke a couple years ago of those two programs being added to the SEC. Well, for a whole bunch of reasons, but also just to me, well, the conference, the bigger it gets, just starts to become more and more unwieldy, especially with football scheduling, as we saw, I think, the results of this past season, not only in the SEC, but the Big Ten, ACC, just some real huge imbalances in scheduling, even intra-conference. But, I thought, well, 16, the good news is at least we'll have a nice, even bracket for the SEC basketball tournaments. That'll be a big plus, at least, because back in the day, yes, the old Big 8 tournament, let the nostalgia wash right over you. Everybody played. There were no buys. The 1 played the 8, the 2 versus the 7, etc., etc. So I thought, perfect. Oh, we'll have a 1 versus 16, a 2 versus 15. But no, even the SEC has managed to screw this up. I mean, truly, why would we mess up a perfect 16-team bracket for this monstrosity? I suppose to protect the sanctity of the regular season, which somehow seems to matter more to people in men's basketball than it does in men's football. But really, the more funny thing to me is that for years, the first round of the SEC tournament, that Wednesday, where the 4 lowest teams on the rung, the 4 lowest seeds in men's basketball. This is, of course, true for women's basketball as well. But that was considered basically, if you had to cover that, as a media member, that was punishment, essentially. So what did the SEC decide to do? Well, let's double it. We definitely need more of that. We need 4 full games of punishment on that day, the most boring day in all of college basketball. Let's expand it a little bit further. So I don't know. I suppose the idea of keeping the double buys and, well, the single buy in this case as well, I suppose that's good for the regular season. It makes it more interesting with a 16-team field. But I have to say, I don't know. Just looking at that bracket kind of hurts my eyes a little bit. That's just me. And with all that said, thanks for joining me here today on Locked On Mizzou as per usual, and making this show your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Chris Gordy's Locked On SEC podcast. Yes, where it just means more. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to audio podcasts as well. So until next time, I'm John Miller, and thanks for listening to Locked On Mizzou.